I want to briefly talk about the right-wing political commentator Steven Crowder. He has a show on YouTube, I believe now it's on Rumble, called Louder with Crowder. And I don't normally discuss people's personal lives on this channel, right? There are some rare exceptions, and I think this is going to be one of them. And so he released this video recently, I believe this was yesterday, where he is talking about his personal life, and a divorce that he's going through seems to have been drawn out for at least a couple of years now, and probably even longer if you read in between the lines of what he's saying. And the reason why I want to bring this up is twofold. First of all, some of the specifics that he says here in this video, I think they're a pretty good clue as to maybe what's going on in his marriage and the way that he sees relationships and the way that he sort of imparts, some of his own, let's call it wisdom to his audience, right? His audience is mostly very young kids, right? I would assume that the majority of them are anywhere between a bit under 18 to maybe their early 20s at the oldest, right? His style of humor and commentary or whatever is just not going to appeal to anybody that has any kind of, maturity and development beyond those stages. But the second part is he did sort of build a brand on being this, I don't want to call him a self-help guru, but he did have this like infamous article back in 2015, right, where he was essentially talking about his own wedding day in a way where he was just kind of making fun of other people's weddings, other people, I guess, that he saw in a venue next to his. To him, it was kind of like this harbinger of this is exactly why their marriages might not last or why it's not going to be special, so on and so forth, right? So he was presenting essentially a theory as to why his particular style of wedding and his way of doing things would be the right way of doing things and would bring longevity to a relationship. Obviously, this did not happen. But if you are a young person and you've been taken in by Crowder, right, I would really urge you to maybe watch this video and this analysis because much of the advice that he's been giving you about relationships is really off the mark, and I'm going to explain why. But first, let's take a look at what he has to say about this.
I have been living with a proverbial boot on my neck for going on years now. Since 2021, I've been living through what has increasingly been a horrendous divorce. Now, let me say on the outset, to be clear, there is no infidelity, any kind of physical abuse at all on either side. And no, this was not my choice. My then wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted. It's been the most heartbreaking experience of my life, what I consider to be my deepest personal failure. And just so you know, my opinions on parenting and families have not changed. I've always believed that children need a mom and a dad, that divorce is horrible. And I still believe that children need a mom and a dad and that divorce is horrible. But in today's legal system, my beliefs don't matter. In Texas, divorce is permitted when one party wants it, period. So for
All right, so I'm not really going to go any further than this, right? Because he sort of gives it away from the beginning, right? The first thing that I noticed when I saw this video yesterday was how he just kept emphasizing the fact that in Texas, right, you could have this easy, no-fault divorce, right? If you want to escape a marriage fairly quickly, you could do that without having to jump through these hoops, irrespective of whether or not you have children. And he seems to be very much against that, right? And that is the thing that kind of gives it away, right? A person that has this mentality when it comes to any kind of relationships, right? When it comes to marriage in general, when it comes to just kind of like understanding what it means to be romantically involved, understanding that a romantic entanglement, ideally, right, this is a consensual arrangement between two consenting people, right? And he doesn't quite seem to understand that, right? He keeps kind of emphasizing and implying that it should have been harder for his wife to go through these divorce proceedings, right? It should have been harder to it from his perspective to break up a marriage, to break up a family since they have children. And of course, it doesn't work like that. I mean, I recognize what he's saying in terms of, divorce is bad. It's bad for kids. I mean, that is true, right? I grew up with a single parent, right? Single mother, right? That obviously presents difficulties. But I'm not exactly sure what his sort of alternative would be. And I'm also not at all surprised that he has this kind of retrograde, authoritarian perspective on relationships, right? When it comes to men that are conservative or people in general who are conservative, they do tend to lean when it comes to like family and relationship dynamics. They are more hierarchical, right? And in many respects, they're also more authoritarian. Now, there's definitely a kind of like left wing authoritarianism when it comes to certain kinds of relationships and whatnot. But generally speaking, I think in the United States of America, this is much more applicable, right, to conservative men. Now, what's kind of fascinating here is when you look at this article, right, from back in, this is May 2015, when he was writing about his 2012 marriage. When you read some of the advice that he's doling out, and implicitly, right, he's implicitly doling out advice here, you sort of understand perhaps maybe why a relationship like this might go south, right? So this is the way that he begins things. As anyone who's read my abstinence column here at Fox News Opinion could guess, my wedding is something that I've looked forward to for quite some time. After having tied the knot at the end of August, I can now say beyond all shadow of a doubt that it was everything I'd hoped and prayed that it would be since childhood. I'd also prayed to be bitten by a radioactive spider and develop sticky hands, but I was an idiot. I mean, I don't even have to comment on how bad his like writing is in a sentence by sentence basis, but beyond that, let's just look at some of the specifics. All right, let me preface this column by saying this. My wife and I not only waited sexually in every way, but we didn't shack up as live-ins, and most importantly, we courted each other in a way that was consistent with our publicly professed values. So, for the fans of Crowder out there who might, they might have read this in 2015, or maybe they might have read this recently. None of this is a very good idea, right? I understand that sexually speaking, you should do whatever you're comfortable with, right? Whether that means waiting for marriage or not. But here's some realities. First of all, this insistence that he didn't shack up as live-ins, right? And he's kind of like phrasing this in totally deflationary terms. It seems to me that if he didn't shack up with her, right, the person that he was going to marry before actually marrying, he probably had never lived with a woman before in his life outside of his mother. And this is pretty terrible, right? In my life, right, it took living with 3 different women, right, back to back, right, in romantic partnerships before I even like truly even kind of like found, my balance and my equilibrium and my understanding of, okay, this is what it means to live with a woman. This is how you divvy up chores. This is how you deal with everything from her mood swings to your own mood swings. Because yes, you're going to have mood swings. You're going to have things that don't go your way, right? We don't have to reduce this all to some sort of like hormonal or sexist language or anything like that. But the fact is, you're going to have to deal with yourself, right? And you're going to have to deal with each other. He does not have that experience, and he's essentially telling a bunch of kids that it's fine, right? It's fine to just do as you do and get married without actually establishing some baseline experience. So the fact that he didn't do this, but was kind of bragging about as it was, like just right away, you should know that this is a person with almost no relationship experience and also absolutely no sexual experience, right? Which is a separate question. I don't believe it's actually a good idea, right, to go into a marriage as virgins, right? It's not a good idea, right, for all kinds of reasons. But most basic among them, I guess, is the fact that you're going to have to figure out like whether or not you're sexually compatible. And if you haven't had sex, eventually, right, you might find out that you're not, which is going to be a problem for you. It might not necessarily lead to divorce, but all relationships have various forms of stress. This is going to be, yet another form of stress, and it could very well become a major form of stress, right? And the rest of this, right? He's just kind of like, upon merely becoming married, right? He's just kind of essentially bragging about this. He's bragging about the wedding, and he's looking askance at everybody else, right? The people next to us that morning, well, theirs, meaning their wedding, was just one big party, and the morning after, just another hangover. Our weddings were the same event in name only. They know it, and we know it. Well, right, there's a non-trivial chance that those people are still married and you're not. To what extent, right? This is just pure speculation on my part, but he's done a lot of stuff that I think, like a lot of these like red pill types, they are always just kind of like, they're pretending like they are the ones that really understand women, and they really understand relationships, and they really understand sex, and whatever. And he kind of like plays up to that a little bit, right? Not in the same way that a generic red pill type would, but a red pillar might have these kinds of perspectives. And yet at the same time, um, he's done so many things that I think, like, if you're like an average woman, like, and this is like a relationship that you're in, you're going to be turned off, and you're going to be systematically more and more and more turned off, right? Right. He's expressed everything from just like pointless cruelty to various groups, right? Because I guess he fancies himself a comedian, so that gives him license to be needlessly offensive. Like I said in my conversation with Arnold Schroeder, right? It's not so much the being offensive that's a problem, right? If you decide to become an offensive person, you being offensive is simply something that you are indulging in, right? It becomes a kind of self-indulgence. But if the world is going to tolerate this indulgence, you have to actually give something in return, right? And a great comedian could, on the one hand, be offensive, but on the other hand, a great comedian also offers great comedy and other things of objective value to society. He hasn't been able to do that, right? If you look at some of the sort of jokes that he's played, right, it's just like totally like racist caricatures of like Asians or whatever, right? In other situations, he was doing this thing where he was just constantly all the time dressing up as a woman, right? And there's been some like speculation as to his actual like sexual orientation. I mean, who knows? But it was just ostensibly like, I guess, to make fun of trans people or cross dressers or whatever, kind of like, in between on that spectrum. But I mean, none of it was funny, right? He had that sort of years quest, right, to avoid debating Sam Cedar, and it got to the point where everybody knew, right? Everybody knew that he was avoiding Sam Cedar of the Majority Report because he did not actually want to get into debate and lose. After a while, like a woman will lose her respect for you, right? Because a woman does not want to see this kind of pointless, needless cruelty from her partner. She does not want to see this kind of like total, self-indulgence after self-indulgence that doesn't really lead to anywhere. And she also doesn't want to see you essentially pussy out from a debate, right, for years on end, right, and explaining to her at the dinner table night after night, this is why I'm not doing it. This is why it's not because I'm scared. Don't worry about it. I'm still, your courageous alpha male, right? So, these kinds of articles, like people that write this kind of stuff, right? There's absolutely no reason to write these kinds of stories about your marriage. I mean, like, first of all, like on some level, like certain things ought to be kind of, your own thing. Like if you have a wife, right, you should sort of keep certain things to yourself, in terms of having, enough respect for each other that you have like private moments, right, that nobody else sees, that nobody else deals with, right? Especially not, like I'm not even talking about like close friendships. I'm talking about just give like to like random like little kids watching this stuff, right? You're sending them these articles. You're telling them that this is my life, right? Anybody that is so kind of excessively like fixated on discussing these aspects of themselves, despite the fact that it's not even like the core of what he does. This is someone with a ton of insecurities, right? This is someone that doesn't know what he's doing. This is someone that doesn't understand relationships. This is someone that doesn't understand sex. This is someone that has not really, in his 20s or whatever when this happened, hasn't actually thought through the consequences going into the future, right? And now the reason why this is especially such a big personal failure to him is he built, a brand around the same, the exact opposite, right? On longevity, right? Same thing with Jordan B. Peterson. Why is he so scared to admit the fact that he was hopelessly addicted, pretty much to the point of actual almost dying to drugs? He can't admit that because he built a brand based on the exact opposite. So anyway, I found these comments that he made over the years, right, about women, about men, women, relationships, all of that. And I don't find all of them necessarily horrible, right? Especially since I don't have like many of the same typical perspectives that liberals or leftists might have when it comes to men, women, and evolutionary psychology and all this stuff. The relative positions of men and women in society, right? So I don't find necessarily all this stuff as offensive as some people do. So I'm going to be able to give you maybe some perspectives that you don't necessarily hear from the liberals that would be highlighting these kinds of comments. So this is one tweet. As Steven Crowder has said, he has been going through a divorce since 2021. Let's see what he's had to say about women throughout that time. Right. So this is presented by this guy without comment. So this is from Steven Crowder. Men control access to relationships and women control access to sex. I'm not exactly sure what the kind of like liberal response to this would be, but my response to this is, well, yes, women obviously do control access to sex, right? Now, this is, I'm not sure to what extent this is true, though. I mean, men control access to relationship. It's like, well, have you as a man ever been in a relationship or wanted to be in a relationship with someone that did not want a relationship with you? Right? There's plenty of examples of men like being involved in one night stands, and the woman, she never calls back. You never hear from her again, and you get essentially ghosted. That happens all the time. Like it's not just right that women get needlessly attached after a casual encounter. Right? Men also experience the same exact thing, and male-female psychology is actually remarkably similar in this respect. If you have something like a relationship that is being sort of dangled above your head, and you have to either like work for it too hard or like whatever it might be, both like male and female psychology would dictate that you're going to feel that something is being kept from you and you're going to want it more and more and more, right? This is not something that's like uniquely female or uniquely male. Anyone that says otherwise, especially like red pill types, these are people that they don't have sex, they don't have relationships, they definitely don't have successful long-term relationships, healthy, mature relationships, right? They don't have any of that, right? So it's one of these things where it's like, he thinks that he's saying something profound, but it's not, right? But again, I don't know if a liberal would really break it down the way that I did. So here's another tweet presented without comment by Steven Crowder. Women are doing less work at home. They're unhappier. Divorce rates are skyrocketing, and men don't want to marry them. Great job, feminism. Well, he later on, he says that women are the unhappiest that they've ever been. I'm not so sure how true that is. I mean, relative to when? Relative to the 1800s, relative to the 1500s, relative to ancient Rome, right? The further back you go in history, the word happiness is maybe a little bit, it's a little bit too loaded, right? But at the same time, right, you could probably say that this kind of like baseline experience is probably because happiness is it's one of these things where people are too interested in happiness, right? There's other things in life beyond happiness. The more that you try to pursue happiness, ironically, the less happy that you'll be, right? Happiness and contentment and other things come about from productivity. They come about from fulfilling some kind of purpose, right? So in that way, right, I can imagine maybe a person, ancient Rome, might find a little bit more purpose in some respects than a modern person today. But generally speaking, the further back that you go in history, the further back you go in time, the more miserable that experience is, right? The more miserable that existence is, right? And I don't think you could debate that. All right, here's another one that for whatever reason, so like a liberal decides to like retweet this without comment as if it says everything. It's not controversial to say that women are weaker and less physically capable than men. Well, I mean they are, right? They are physically weaker on average, right? And they are less physically capable on average than men. But we don't really have a society based on physical workload anymore. Most men are not doing menial labor, right? Most women are not either. Men and women are not in sparring contests. They're not engaging in any of this. So what exactly what exactly would the controversy be, and why are we going to retweet this without comment as if this says everything? I mean, there isn't anything controversial around this, or it shouldn't be. I would say, however, that Steven Crowder would take a non-controversial statement like this, right, which again to me is non-controversial, and he would start sneaking in all sorts of unwarranted conclusions about what male-female relations ought to look like based on this fact, based on sexual dimorphism, right? And again, liberals, they need to understand sexual dimorphism exists, and it's going to present itself not just in physical ways, but also in psychological ways. But also be aware of the ways that right-wingers will sneak in conclusions, often without even quite stating them, right? He does not, it's not as if he's making a broader argument here, but if you really press him on this, you would say, so what? Eventually, you're going to get into all kinds of reactionary perspectives. All right, here's another one. If men have no say on abortion, women have no say on child support alimony. Fair compromise? It's not a fair compromise for various reasons, but we're gonna just skip this for now because this video would be too long. So this is the comment on it. This one is genuinely sad. Steven Crowder writes, "I just wish women understood how much men love them and want them to be the women they were designed to be." I'm not sure how much men in general love women. I'm not sure to what extent women, generally speaking, love men. I think, relationships tend to be pretty dysfunctional from what I see, right? Steven Crowder is a prime example of this. And the word love is very loaded as well, right? I mean, exactly what do we mean? As far as like the women they were designed to be, I mean, designed for what exactly, right? When I was speaking with Arnold Schroeder on the bonus show, right, we were talking about the sort of like parameters of human existence, the parameters of human biology. There really is a lot that we've been designed for, right? And we don't have to think of the word design in this kind of creationary sense, but just generally speaking, design in the sense that we have a given biology, and what are we capable to do with it, right? If you were going to look at history, right, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 years ago, and you would see essentially murder rates of human beings going anywhere from between like a few percentage points, right, meaning like you have a few percent chance of being murdered, right, as a male, right, throughout your existence, right, starting from there to different situations, right, you had 15, 30, 40, even 60% murder rates for males, right? So we have a kind of like baseline experience like that going back a very long time. And now, as human beings, the same human beings, right? You look at something like Japanese society where murder is practically unheard of, right? It's just not a day-to-day experience, right? It's just not something that people think about, right? You might see it in the media in Japan. You might have, slasher films or whatever, but that's because, it's one of those things where human beings would be very curious about, particularly something that they themselves don't experience anymore, right? It becomes so exotic in that way, right? So what we're designed for is actually the parameters are more or less unknown. Some parameters are known. The majority we've yet to have really explored, right? And just that one example should be suffice. I mean, think about it. Going from a society where you could potentially have a 60% chance of being murdered, right, any male, to it being totally unheard of, totally, it seems as if this is an alien species that we're talking about. It's not. It's the same set of human beings. So let's always keep that in mind. Here's another one. Femininity is dying, and it's because of people like AOC. And statistically, women are more miserable than ever. Again, it's just totally like uncritical commentary. Like it's just like you like if you are a watcher and a fan of Crowder, you really must be a little kid, right? Like, can't, as an adult male, assuming that you had healthy relationships, are you really going to be thinking this? Like, are you really going to be just passing this off so uncritically? Wouldn't your actual day-to-day experience of being in a functional relationship sort of tell you otherwise, right? I mean, like, it's as if he believes that you it's so difficult, right, to have a relationship where you have a male and a female. They're both, have full-time jobs. They both split up their chores, right? They both cook, right? And they both have sex that they enjoy, right? It's as if that this is totally impossible, right? And as if you can't find happiness and let's just call it non-misery, right, in this kind of arrangement. The last one. These days, guys are gun shy with women because they don't want to be labeled with sexual harassment. I'm not exactly sure what this is referring to. I mean, are we talking about not trying to like engage in sexual relationships at your place of employment, right? That tends to be like a good idea, right, to avoid that. The vast majority of ways that, like, if you look at like street approachment, right? A lot of guys, they would just catcall women, and I've often wondered, like, they must be doing that because at some point they must have had one positive response at some point somewhere, right? Or else, why would you do it again and again? Like, you must have had, even if you had like thousands of failures, and by failure I would say you catcall a woman and she totally ignores you. Even if that happens to you tens of thousands of times, if it happens, positively just once, right? And this is what I said about that early, that psychology, right? Men's psychology. If you get that thing once, right? If you get a little taste of it, right? You become totally obsessed with it. You become totally fixated, and you want it. And if it's being kept away from you, perhaps you're going to get more and more fixated, especially if you don't have a competent strategy to actually get what you want. Ironically, like, he's saying that he's sort of like against the status quo. And again, I'm not even sure to what extent it is a status quo, but if, let's say for the sake of argument, this gun shy thing is becoming a status quo. If you look at the kind of like rates of sexual activity among, like people in their 20s now or people in their late teens, it tends to be like very, very low. Like, we're actually increasing quite a bit with the number of boys, for instance, right? Let's say 18, 19 years old, early 20s, that have never had a sexual experience, right? And I think part of this has to do with the fact that things are getting more and more competitive in this world, right? I talked about this also with Arnold Schroeder. The world is becoming progressively more and more competitive, more difficult. If you look at the rates of college graduation among men versus women, right, for the first time in the last few years, right, we now have more women that are graduating college versus men. That discrepancy is only going to accelerate because, one thing that men's rights activists and red pill types are correct on is men's problems are not really taken all that seriously. And when they are, the men are the ones that get blamed, right? So if men are gun shy, right, it could be just a total lack of confidence, something that is not very surprising, right? Again, red pillars have correctly identified some of these tendencies, right? They just have absolutely no solutions, and the right-wing biases blind them to like a more kind of systemic understanding of what's going on. And they're also the total ignorance when it comes to things like biology or psychology also means that they take perspectives that are simply not even in line with like, science, period, right? But, if men are having sex less and less now, you would think that Steven Crowder would be positive on this, right? Because he himself, right, was a virgin until marriage. Well, now men are just, without trying to be virgins until marriage, many of them are being pushed into that scenario. And again, I do wonder what's going to happen in the future, right? In terms of having a large male population that is unable, right, to find either fulfillment or proper work or proper relationships or proper outlets, they're going to actually resemble a lot more of the Steven Crowder type, right? They're going to look more and more like him. They're going to act more like him. They're going to have the same resentments. They're going to have the same kind of confusion, you know, like why aren't things going my way? Why did this divorce happen? Right? This came out of nowhere, and yet, I mean, look, you know, he must have been thinking about this already at this point, right? Just rereading what he wrote before, right? All the seeds of these problems and these dysfunctions, not even necessarily the divorce, but, you know, reading something like this, you could just tell, like, without even, like, even if they never would have gotten divorced, you would understand that this is somebody that has any number of pathologies and dysfunctions when it comes to sex and when it comes to relationships, right? This is not a normal thing to write. This is not a normal kind of thing to brag about, all right? So, yeah, unfortunate for Steven Crowder. Again, I don't normally talk about this personal angle to things, but keep in mind, right? He is telling children, essentially children, or, you know, adults that are functionally children, how to live, what to do, how to think, right? And just like Jordan B. Peterson, there really is absolutely nothing there. So thank you guys for watching. I'm going to actually have a video pretty soon, sometime in the next week, on Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. I'm finishing that book up today. And I'm going to have a video just kind of reviewing it to prepare for my conversation with Norman Finkelstein on his book, right, which mentions Robin DiAngelo among others. So we're going to just sort of treat this systematically. Also, I believe maybe Monday or so, I'm going to put up a video for patrons. So this is going to be patron only. I'm talking with an Irish poet. You might have seen him around, not on my channel, but on the channel of Ethan Pinch. And his name is Dan Linden, and we discussed AI among other topics, but primarily we're discussing art, right, in the context of AI. Tons of art is being produced by AI programmers who aren't either actually artists themselves, or if they are, they simply recap the same kind of problems that we've seen in the art world as a whole in the past century, and really kind of like from the beginning. They sort of recreate the same problems and issues in the art that they're generating through AI, right? So, and you know, one of the kind of fascinating aspects to all that is the fact that, you know, if we have essentially art being produced by non-artists, and yet at the same time we're in this situation where for many decades now people have been kind of like systematically and perhaps even intentionally confused as to what art is. Eventually people are not going to tell the difference, right? I mean, it's very hard now for people in the art world to say, well, this piece of AI art is unacceptable or bad because, right? And the reason why they can't make those arguments is they spent so much time essentially telling everybody that everything is valid, right? Illustration is really no different from high art. So anyway, these are some of the things that are coming up in this channel. Thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you guys soon.